The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Hazmat Series Part 5, Shipping Papers and Important Documentation, brought to you by the Shortline Safety Institute and the American Shortline and Regional Railroad Association. My name is Sabrina Weiss, and I'm the Vice President of Education and Business Development for the ASL-RRA. Before we begin, I want to let everyone know that we are recording this webinar, and we will make the recording available to participants so you may go back and review anything that we've discussed today. To ensure quality audio for the recording, all attendees are on mute, and you will only be able to hear our presenters speaking. If you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the questions bar on your screen, and we will read through all the submitted questions at the end of the webinar. I want to introduce today's presenter, Dave Buccalow, General Manager for the Central California Traction Company, for one more day. He actually retires on Monday, but he says that he'll still be available for questions, so we appreciate that. And Dave's actually on the line with me now, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him to get us started.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to talk about shipping papers and other important documentation today. And of course, you know, anytime that a shipment is tendered to us, we need to know what's in the car, and that's especially important for any hazardous material. So the customers can submit the shipping papers to you, and many of us get them electronically now through EDI, but they have to properly list the information as required by both FRA and PHMSA USDOT. So here's an example of a shipping paper from Diamond Vogel Paint, and of course we don't ship just one box usually, but more like box cars, tank cars, and things like that. But they show that it is hazardous material. It's one box. It's got the UN number, the classification, and the packing group. So it's all there, and it's signed by the shipper, and you can generate your waybill off of that. Shipping papers, as it relates to hazardous materials or hazardous substances, the information that must be included on them, if your shippers aren't doing that, is describe additional entries needed for DOT special permits, limited quantities, hazardous substances, hazardous waste, radioactive material, and if it's empty packaging or residue packaging. They have to describe everything for the shipments, and of course we're talking about rail rather than air, highway, or water, unless you're doing intermodal. And then of course those containers that are going to be on your intermodal cars will have to have the proper hazardous materials information. You have to determine the technical names or other special entries that are required to properly handle and transport it. You've got to describe the guidelines related to the emergency response telephone number, and in most cases that's going to be Chemtrec, and identify record retention requirements for shipping papers related to hazardous materials. Definition of shipping papers is used in the hazardous materials regulations. A shipping paper for hazardous materials transportation is any document that contains the information required to describe the hazardous materials being transported. It may include a shipping order, a bill of lading, a manifest, or other type of shipping documents. So once a document's created in your system, whether it be RMI or another system, Ship Express or something, you are going to have a waybill for your train crew to have if you need to give them that copy of it. Or the customer can leave these myriad of types of documents, as long as they contain the correct information, in a mailbox at their facility. If it's after hours and a crew works at night, they can actually pick the car up and move it using the shipping paper, and in combination with the DOT ERG. There's basic rules for shipping papers. If you transport any quantity of hazardous material, you must have a properly prepared shipping paper to accompany that shipment. And this includes any hazardous substances, hazardous waste, and marine pollutants, unless accepted. Each person who offers a hazardous material for transportation must accurately Describe the hazardous material on the shipping paper in a manner required by the HMR. There are some exceptions for consumer commodities, and you have to look at the hazardous materials table, which we're actually going to do a seminar on later on, to show you which accepted ones there are. And certain U.S. Department of Energy and U.S. Department of Defense shipments are accepted. And don't attempt to ask them for that information. I did that once and almost went to jail over it when we stopped a shipment of nuclear rods from a submarine because we said they didn't have the proper shipping papers, but we found out that they're exempt. Here's an example of a shipping paper. The hazardous material, and you have to make sure the spelling is correct because many products are similar but not the same spelling. The mode of shipment has to be shown, whether it's a hazardous waste, hazardous substance, a marine pollutant, and a hazardous materials description. You can also get mixed shipments in boxcars or intermodal, and you can make that shipping paper showing what's in that. UPS is a big shipper of mixed loads, as is J.B. Hunt and Schneider. When they prepare the shipping papers, it must be legible, so you got to be able to read it. There can be codes and abbreviations, which are standard in this case. The Diamond Vogel paint bill of lading shows 10 CTNs or cartons, paint UN 1263, packing group 2, and the total amount. The emergency response telephone number needs to be on there, whether it's Chemtrack or, in this case, Diamond Vogel paint. Again, being legible. They must be legible and printed in English also. And you can reference 49 CFR 172-201 and 604 for that. There's your paint classification of 3, so it's a flammable 1263 packing group 2. They can actually do multi-page. We wouldn't see that much in the railroads, except again in containers or trailers. They have to let you know it's one page of one, so that you know you don't have anything to do with the multiple papers. There's the emergency response telephone number, which has to be added to our shipping papers or our waybill. And it doesn't, the documents and forms are not specific to the shipping paper. So if Diamond Vogel, in this case, uses their own form, you can use that as a shipping paper or bill of lading to generate your waybill. The emergency response telephone number must be monitored at all times. The hazardous material shipment is in transportation. So that's why a lot of people use Chemtrack, because that's a monitored number, but they have to be a member of Chemtrack to use that. Someone has to be able to answer the phone on the other end and be knowledgeable of the product, and it has to be on the shipping paper immediately following the description so that you can see it and it's clear. Again, you can reference 172-201 and 172-604. Retention of shipping papers. The shipper must keep a copy of the shipping paper, either electronic or paper, for 2 years after it's been accepted by the carrier. We, as the carrier, only have to keep the shipping paper for 1 year. But there's an exception to that. The shipper and carrier must keep a copy of hazardous waste manifests for 3 years after it's accepted by the carrier. So a good rule of thumb is that you need to file that shipping paper either electronically or in a paper copy. If you're doing it EDI with them and you can keep it electronically, you can also keep it electronically, and it must be accessible to and available at your principal place of business of the shipper or carrier by authorized federal, state, or local agencies at reasonable times and locations. So if our friends at the FRA come in and say they want to see your shipping papers that you got from shipper XYZ or Diamond Vogel Paint, you can pull those out and show them the shipping paper and the document. And again, you can reference 172-201. They do have the right to look at it, and it's at your principal place of business. So if you have a centralized customer service center, that's where you keep all the information, and it could be from multiple railroads. Then you can get the customer service center to send those papers to that railroad or that location where they're looking for it. It does not have to be held at that location. Again, shipping description of hazardous materials. The basic description in one of these two orders: the proper shipping name, hazard class, division number, ID number, packing group, or the ID number, proper shipping name, hazard class, and packing group. So here we have benzene. It's a class 9. UN number is 1114, and the packing group is 2, and the amount of the product is 1,100 gallons. The quantity must include units of measurement, e.g. pounds, gallons, kilograms. For explosive materials, the quantity must be the net explosive mass. The total quantity may appear before or after the basic description. The units of measurements and packaging may be abbreviated. So in this case, we have 20 drums. They didn't abbreviate it. Multiple basic description sequences. If they have more than one type of product, they can go through and give you the 2 products, and then the class and the packing group. And we won't see that very much again unless it's intermodal. So shipping name, again, here we have a tank truck, so that gives us a little more product, but same as our tank car. Isopropanol, class 3, UN 1219, packing group 2. It's 1 tank truck or 1 tank car. Technical and chemical group names must be entered in parentheses between the proper shipping name and the hazard class or division number of the following the basic description. So, flammable liquid not otherwise specified, and in this case, they're showing that it contains xylene and benzene. It's class 3, UN 1993, packing group 2. Additional description requirements, group 1. You're going to have dot exemptions and special permits, limited quantities, hazardous substances, radioactive materials, and empty packaging. Dot exemptions and special permits. So you will see on this one that they have a exception, the DOT exception, SP 12009. Again, in most cases, we will not see these because it's mostly intermodal, small package shipments that are in trucks. Limited quantities must have a basic description. And again, this would be more in our intermodal containers, just letting them know it's a limited quantity, 4 liters, and it's in that container. Hazardous substances. Except for Class 7 radioactive materials, if the proper shipping name for the material is that of a hazardous substance, does not identify the hazardous substance by name, the name of the hazardous substance must be entered in parentheses in association with the basic description. If the material contains 2 or more hazardous substances, at least 2 or more hazardous substances with the lowest reportable quantities must be entered. For hazardous waste, the waste code may be used in lieu of the name. The letters RQ must be entered on the shipping paper either before or after the basic description for reportable quantities, if it has a reportable quantity. And finally, in the mixture, the reportable quantity only refers to the quantity of the hazardous substance without regard to other substances in the mix. For example, 200 pounds of a mixture with 10% ethyl alcohol would be a quantity of 20 pounds of ethyl alcohol, less than the 100-pound RQ that the substance has. So, radioactive materials can be quite involved due to precautions taken to safeguard against the unique hazards of materials of radioactive materials. For details, if you ship hazardous materials that contain radioactive substances, and most of us don't, you need to look to 172.203 for guidance. Empty packaging. So here we get our empty package that many of us handle after we get a load in, and it must include the words, or may include the words, residue last contained, followed by excuse me, the basic description of the hazardous materials. So we see one tank car, residue last contained gasoline, class 3 UN 1203 packing group 2, and it's in a UTLX, that's a DOT 113 car. The description of hazardous materials is developed by putting together the information required. The additional 2 items that help complete the shipping description and any information required by 172.203. The second group of these additional requirements are modal specific, and we'll go look at those. We want to talk about transportation by rail. Freight container, transport vehicle, or portable tank, and the reporting mark and number are also displayed. Additional entries are required for Division 2.1 materials or their residue transported in DOT 113 tank cars, and the notation "do not hump" or cut off car while in motion must be on the shipping paper. Elevated materials shipped by rail at speeds not exceeding 15 miles an hour in accordance with 172.247. A notation can be made such as a maximum operating speed of 15 mph must be entered on the shipping papers. Additional description requirements on the shipping papers to help clearly communicate the dangers or special precautions necessary to properly handle and transport hazardous materials in accordance with the HMR. The third group of additional description requirements deals with specific types of hazards and includes technical names for NOS or not otherwise specified or other generic descriptions, marine pollutants, poisonous material, elevated temperature material, organic peroxides, and self-reactive material such as phosphorus. Technical names for NOS and other generic descriptions. Unless otherwise accepted, if a material is described on a shipping paper by one of the proper shipping names in the letter G, column 1 of the hazardous materials table, 172.101, the technical name for the hazardous materials must be entered in parentheses in association with the basic description. For Division 5.2 organic peroxides, which may qualify for more than one generic listing depending on the concentration, the technical name must include the concentration being shipped or the concentration range for the generic listing. An NOS entry that describes a mixture or solution of 2 or more hazardous materials must include the technical names of at least 2 of the components, most predominantly contributing to the hazardous material mixture or solution, and must be entered on the shipping papers in parentheses in association with the basic description. Certain materials are accepted from having to display names in association with the basic description, and they are discussed in greater detail with 172.203 K2. While they're showing a ship there, we do ship marine pollutants by rail, and there is a placard for that, and we have to have a spill plan and prevention plan in place, except by transportation by vessel. So they get out of some of their requirements there. And if it's an oil, it's in place as their basic description, and we're all learning about that through our movement oil trains and oil in general, that we all have to have a spill prevention and response plan. The word poison or toxic must be entered in association with the basic descriptions when materials meet the definition of a Division 6.1, Packing Group 1 or 2, and neither the shipping name or the hazard class or the division discloses that fact. Poison inhalation hazards for materials that are poisonous by inhalation. The words poison inhalation hazard or toxic inhalation hazards, and the word zones A, B, and C or D for gases, excuse me, or zones A, B for liquids shall be entered on the shipping papers. Elevated materials, such as molten sulfur or tars or waxes. One tank car, hot tars, liquid. Class 3, UN 1999, Packing Group 3. Organic peroxides and self-reactive materials will show the flammable solid or an organic peroxide, Division 5.2 on them. Shipper certification. Last entry in the shipping paper is their certification, stating the hazardous materials are properly offered for transportation to the according to the HMR. It must be legibly signed by the principal officer, partner, or employee of the shipper or his agent. A legal signature may include manually, by typewriter, or by other mechanical means. They can also certify it now by EDI. So they can do that also with an EDI signature now. On our billing, though, we have to show who certified the shipment by the person's name. So here's a couple of examples of a shipping paper with the shipper showing his name and who shipped it. We don't really need to worry much about international, except for any cars going over the border. Again, that it's properly classified. I'm going to skip the air transportation certificate. Radioactive certificate is basically the same, again, just certifying it. And an empty residue car containing hazardous material residue does not have to be certified by the shipper, but in most cases they will send you a paper certifying that the tank car is empty. Hazardous waste manifests are the same. They still have to be certified that you're transporting them. Some of the states require the use of state designated manifest. It is acceptable to use that state manifest for your federal shipments, as long as the state form looks like the EPA 8722, and most of the states, their forms are exactly the same. Again, we may get some waste shipments, and this is an example of a waste flammable liquids NOS. Contains petroleum distillates and alcohol. It's flammable, UN 1993, Packing Group 3. And we're up to questions on shipping papers, if anybody has any now.
Excellent. And here's where I will step in and remind everyone on the line that if they have questions for Dave, they can go ahead and type them into the questions bar on their screen, and then I'll read them out to them as we go along here. So the first one that always comes up that I will go ahead and answer is, will this presentation be made available to attendees? And our plan is that we will have a recording of this webinar available that will be posted on the Shortline Safety Institute website, and we will also post a copy of the presentation along with the recording. So you'll definitely have access to the presentation after the fact. And I think Dave said that you're welcome to use it to sort of bring your own teams up to speed on a lot of these issues. So would you agree with that, Dave?
Yes, and if your customer service folks that are doing your preparations of waybills and things, this is excellent training for them to review, and you can use that as part of your 3-year hazmat training if you want for them, because they're not out switching cars. They're not out looking at placards, though they need to understand what the placarding is. But this is an excellent thing for them to go over, and you can use that as part of your training for your hazmat employees, because your customer service folks, if they are doing waybilling for hazardous materials, they fall under being a hazardous materials employee. And I know some railroads have gotten defects from the FR. I don't know of anybody that's been fined for that, for not having their folks trained on the hazardous materials regulations that do the billing. They're your first line of defense to catch an issue if a customer does bill the car wrong.
Excellent. Great. We don't have a lot of questions coming in, but one that I've got here, Dave, is you mentioned part 2 of this series. What will that cover?
Part 2 will cover the hazardous materials table, the HMT. And it's a place where you can see where the shippers mostly would use that, but it helps you also to be able to look up a shipment and make sure it's listed right.
Great.
And I'm not sure when you plan to do that, but it's how to use the HMT.
Right, and I don't think we've got that one scheduled yet, but I'm sure it will be before the end of the year. And so we'll make sure as soon as that one is scheduled, it'll get posted on the website, and we'll send an email out to everyone promoting that both in the newsletter and by e-blast. So folks will be aware of it as soon as we get it scheduled. Right,
and PHMSA is redoing these modules, and they're actually put out by PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Administration. They are going to be available online for free for any training that you want to do. Maybe we might do a webinar, even ladies, on Sabrina and Michelle, on all of the free training material that our friends in the government are now putting together and how to access that. That might be a good one.
I agree. That sounds fantastic. So we'll talk about that here and see if we can get something put together. But I think that'd be a great idea. And I'm sure folks would love to hear about free resources out there for training. So anytime we can pull that all into one presentation, I think folks would appreciate it. Another question that we have here is, at what volume is a car considered a residue car and not a load?
It's around 7% of the product that's left. They can leave up to 7% in the car.
Okay.
So beyond 7%, if for some reason you think some of your customers are leaving more residue in the car, that 7% is a caveat that unloaded to the best extent possible, but DOT has taken the tack that anything over 7% is a loaded car. A lot of the hazardous waste shippers, if you have them on your line, that ship these mixed loads of hazardous flammable liquids and things like that, that are a lot of paints and thinners and solvents and things like that, will eventually start to get a heel in the car where it's literally a loaded car because they can't unload the gunk out of it. And I know in a past life we charged customers as a loaded car, and they had to start turning them back as loaded, and it got them to clean the cars. But 7% or unloaded as best as practically be unloaded, but anything over 7% is considered a load.
Great.
Some shippers will argue with him on that because they say they can't get it all out, but 7% is what FRA uses.
That's okay. Got it. Dave, I'm going to ask you to switch to the last slide here, and while we wait to see if any more questions are going to come through, I'll just let folks know that if you think about any questions after we wrap up here and you want to reach out to Dave directly, His contact information is available on the last slide of this presentation. So you might not see it right now, but if you go back and access the PowerPoint once we post it on the website, you'll be able to see that. Can you switch to that last slide, Dave? Is it still in there?
I think it's still in there. For some reason, it's not letting me move it right now. I don't know why.
Huh. Maybe just click on the slide and then try it. Sometimes they get a little...
oh, there we go.
Yeah, sometimes...
There we go. We got it now. Yeah, sometimes it gets a little persnickety, doesn't it?
Exactly. So this is Dave's contact information is up here on the screen. That is his personal email address since he's officially retiring after Monday, but he promises that if anybody reaches out to him and has questions, he will respond. So we certainly appreciate that. And then if you have any questions or feedback on webinars or topics for the Shortline Safety Institute, I would encourage you to reach out to Michelle Malski. Her contact information is up here on the screen. And then obviously if you have any feedback or suggestions for webinars in general, not just Safety Institute, but association webinars, please contact me. My information is up here on the screen. So that's what we've got. Dave, I just wanted to say thank you for having the really authentic train noises in the background as we were going through this. I think it definitely...
Yeah, it was a little hard to stop that because they're right outside the window.
I think that's excellent. It's all on topic. So if nobody has any other questions for now, I'll just say thank you again for taking the time to present for us today. Thank you everyone for joining us. We will send out a link to the recording and the PowerPoint shortly. And if you have any questions, just follow up with Dave or one of us directly. We do have a couple more webinars scheduled for next week. I know we've got another Shortline Safety Institute webinar scheduled for Monday, the 31st. So if you have not registered for that, registration is still open. So go ahead and jump on and do that. And then we have a webinar on C3RS with the FRA. I believe that one is November 1st. So next.
And what's that one on again?
C3RS, and the acronym is all that's in my head right now, and I'm trying to remember what it...
It's the Close Call Reporting System.
Exactly. So
yeah, I just didn't hear you when you said it.
Okay. Folks can go to the ASLRRA website, hover over the Events tab, and click on Webinars for a full list of upcoming webinars. I know we've got 6 or 7 of them currently scheduled. So go ahead and take a look at that, set up the next few, and get registered. But for now, again, thank you all for joining us today. Dave, thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And we know you're retiring, but you're not going away. So we'll look forward to having you doing another webinar with us in the near future.